Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to you about process analysis writing so that you are aware of how to go about your next writing assignment, your very first process analysis essay. Process analysis is where you're explaining to your audience how something is done or how it works. You're going to provide your audience with practical information. It's going to be very logically constructed. And an example might be that you're giving directions on how to assemble a piece of equipment, or you're giving instructions on how to register for classes. Process analysis is also accurate, clear, and easy to follow. Your readers should be able to fully understand how to do something, even if they've never done it before in their lives. That's why it's really important to consider your audience. You want to think about, is my audience going to want or need to perform this process ever? Or maybe they just want to understand the process, but not actually perform it. So the way you write your essay should be hinged on that idea, where you're thinking about your audience's needs or wants. There's a lot of real world application with process analysis, which is why I've chosen it for your first essay. I think there's a lot that you can get from it, just taking this and applying it to your everyday life, no matter what your interests or your field is for your career. So here are some examples from scenes from the college and the workplace. For a child development course, your assignment is to visit a daycare center, and you might choose one confrontation between a child and a teacher and have to explain how the teacher resolved the conflict. As part of a chemistry lab report, you might be asked to summarize the procedure you followed in preparing a solution or conducting an experiment. While working as an engineer at a water treatment plant, you could be asked by your supervisor to write a description of how the city's drinking water is tested and treated for contamination. So a lot of what we have in the real world basically are process analysis types of reporting and documentation. I'm going to go over about 5 different characteristics of the process analysis, and you'll want to keep this in mind for your own essay. Number 1, you're going to include an explicit thesis statement. And this is going to happen early on. You want a clear argument of where your process analysis is headed. You don't want to just explain how something is done without arguing why it's important or what your position is on the way it's done. You might even evaluate the process that you're describing. So one thesis example, if you're considering a how it works process analysis, might be on grief. So I'm going to read this to you. Although understanding the grieving process will not lessen the grief that you experience after the death of a loved one, knowing that your experiences are normal does provide you some comfort. Number 2, on your thesis example of a how-to process analysis, switching to a low-fat diet, a recent nutritional trend, can improve weight control dramatically. In both of these process analysis thesis statements, you'll see that there is an argumentative position being that is visible to the readers on these topics, and you'll want to create something similar. Another important characteristic of the process analysis is that it's organized chronologically, usually. So you want to think about what order the steps are to complete something. Let's say you're talking about, a recipe, how to make something. What do you need to do first? The steps might be grouped into categories or divided into sub-steps. Some things might even happen simultaneously, right? So not just one after the next, but might even happen together. Make sure your essay doesn't sound like a list. You really want to make sure you're still composing complete sentences, not just fragments, right? And you want to have headings and transitional expressions maybe as tools to help you get from one point to the next. So an example of a transitional expression could be once you are called for an interview, ... Or another example could be now that you are done with the meet and greet, ... Please note again that sometimes the steps in a process don't have to occur in any particular order, but if you are going to describe the logical progression, then at least go over the recommended actions that should be used. And you might think that it's more effective to start with informal or simple steps and then later progress to more formal or complex ones. Another characteristic would be to provide background information helpful to your readers, especially since a lot of your readers might not know what your special topic is about and what that entails. So, for example, if you're explaining how CPR works, your readers might need to know how the heart functions in order to understand how pressing down on a person's breastbone propels blood into the arteries. You'll also want to define and explain any technical terms associated with your topic and identify any gear or equipment needed for the process. You might even need to explain where they should go to obtain certain objects so that they can go ahead and complete or perform the steps. A fourth characteristic of the process analysis writing is you want to include an appropriate level of detail. So not too many details, but not so vague, so broad either that we really can't fully understand how this process would work. You really want to make it come to life. And so I think one of the biggest challenges you'll find is how do I write a process analysis paper that goes logically and literally step by step when you should also be keeping us engaged and livening up your writing. You should be using sensory details. Maybe you're describing the sight, smell, taste, sound, or touch of what's going on. That way we feel like we're actually there living that experience with you step by step. You might also consider a figure of speech, like an analogy, a creative comparison, or personification. So you'll want to see how later I'm going to post for you Cindy Chupak's sample writing, Dater's Remorse, so look for that. And she does a really good job, and she uses a lot of humor as well with comparing how she dates men, and she compares that to shopping. So that's an example of lively writing and a very interesting tone. And finally, the fifth characteristic of process analysis is that you need to anticipate trouble spots and offer different kinds of solutions. So you might offer advice to the reader on how to avoid or resolve trouble spots. You might caution the reader to avoid looking a certain way for an interview, or you might warn readers of any difficult or critical steps so that they pay more attention. These kinds of areas in your paper are going to feel like you're being a little more emphatic compared to the other parts you're describing, and that's okay. That's natural. Here is a graphic organizer so that you visual learners can kind of see the breakdown of what your process analysis essay might look like. You're going to want to start with a background information paragraph or two, and somewhere there where you're describing and familiarizing your reader with the topic, you're going to want to have your argumentative statement. And I'm going to ask that you underline your thesis statement in your final draft that you turn in. So think about why you chose your topic and what meaningful point you want to convey about it. And then that way, the rest of your paper is also set up for success supporting that idea. So, of course, if you look at this visual graphic organizer, you only see 4 major steps on here, but that's going to vary from from one student's paper to the next. You might have 3 steps, you might have 6 steps. It just really depends on your idea. And then think about the sub-step breakdown and then what transitions would go with that if needed. And then, of course, at the end, you'll want to give us a final meaningful close. You might refer back to your thesis. But I always like to encourage students, when you get to the conclusion paragraph, what revelation or final reflection are you going to present us with? Something that we haven't already read about in your paper. So it shouldn't just feel like a regurgitation of your intro paragraph. It should feel like we're arriving in a different place now that we've gone on this journey with you through the process analysis. These are my final tips this is the final slide. Make sure to make it clear why the process analysis is included. Hopefully that works its way into your thesis or somewhere in your introduction paragraph early on. It's also helpful. You might want to use the word process or procedure in your essay so that we know that's what's coming, but you don't have to use the word process or the word procedure. It's up to you, and try not to overuse the word. And lastly, when you have completed the process analysis, let readers know that you're about to return to the main topic. So that'll provide some unification and a satisfying close to your paper. Thank you, and email me if you have any questions.